Today I'm going to share a recipe with you for how to make broth. It's not bone broth and it's not stock, but it's high in protein, easy to make in as little as 45 minutes. So when you're short on time, broth is perfect. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest. I'm a former New York City girl, but now I live the simple life with my sweet husband here in the Texas Hill Country. And this channel is all about cooking from scratch, living naturally, and creating a cozy home. So if you're like me and you want to live the simple life no matter where you live, be sure to subscribe to my channel. And don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. In a previous video, I shared with you that there's differences between broth, stock, and bone broth. And I'll link to that video so you can watch that if you've not had a chance to see it to learn what the differences are. But what I want to share with you today is how to make broth. And as I said in the introduction, it's not bone broth. But what's nice about it is it's high in protein and it's a wonderful drink and/or a wonderful base to make soup with. And today I'm going to show you how to make a very simple version of broth, but you can certainly add any types of herbs and spices you like to make it your own. But this is just the basic version for broth. What I've got here is just your basic mirepoix, as it's known, seasoning base. And all it is 1 carrot chopped or diced, 1 stalk of celery diced, and 1 onion diced. And you'll see that you have more onion than you do carrot and celery, and that's how it should be, because a typical mirepoix is 2 parts onion, 1 part carrot, and 1 part celery. And then I also like to add a few peppercorns and a bay leaf. Now I don't add any salt for 2 reasons. One, I like to just have a basic broth that I can season with salt the way I want depending on the recipe that I'm using it in. And the second reason is I like to use a gray wet Celtic sea salt, and that's a living food. And so I'd rather not cook it. I prefer to use it as a seasoning once the food is cooked. And then the star of the show, as you've heard me say before, are 2 beef shanks. Now I like to use shanks when I make broth, but I've also used a chuck steak that has some bone in, or any type of meaty bone. So you want something that has more meat than bone. And that's why shanks are perfect, because they have a lot of meat, but just a little bit of bone. And that's what I like about also using a chuck steak with the bone in, because it's got the bone, but it's a relatively small bone in comparison to the amount of meat that there is. Because broth, as you may recall from the previous video that I did on the differences between broth, stock, and bone broth, is that broth is more meat and less bone. Now I've just got 2 shanks here. You can certainly use more if you want to make a larger amount of broth, or you can just use 1 if you want to make a smaller amount of broth. And you might recognize these shanks from a previous video where you saw them in their frozen form when I did my unboxing of the items that I purchased from US Wellness Meats. And I'll be sure to link to that video in the iCards and in the description below so that you can watch it in case you haven't seen it. And I just wanted to show you these beautiful shanks now that they're taken out of the package. They're really lovely. And I know some of you have asked me, does US Wellness Meat sell grass-fed and organic meat? And yes, it is. They also sell chickens and chicken feed, you know, the whole works. But these are organic and grass-fed. They're just beautiful. Now I just want to show you, beef shanks come with a membrane that's sort of all along the edge here. And when you go to brown these, because that's the first step that we're going to do in making the broth, it can tend to curl up and then it gets difficult to brown. So what I like to do is just take a little kitchen shears and just go all along the edges, clipping the membrane. And I'll show you exactly what I do. I just take this, and I'll put a picture in close so you can see it, but I'm just going to take my kitchen shears and I'm just going to clip right into the membrane. So that's, see, I'm just cutting that. I'm not going to remove it because I like to use every little bit of whatever meat I'm cooking. I feel everything has some nutrition to offer, everything has some flavor to offer, and so all I do is I'm just going to go around and I'm just going to cut that. Now it's going to stay attached. I'm just going to pick this up so you can see. It's going to stay attached, but this, by cutting this membrane and going around and cutting it at, like 1 inch or 2 inch intervals, will help it to stay flat and brown better. And that's what we want. We want to brown it nicely because that's going to give good color and flavor to your broth. Now, speaking of browning it, if you want, you can put this on a baking sheet and brown it in your oven at about 425. And you'd really just have to watch it. Every oven is slightly different, maybe 20 to 30 minutes. And then put the browned shanks into your soup pot, deglaze the baking sheet, and add that, or whatever roasting pan you're using, and add that liquid to your soup pot. But I find that's kind of a lot of work and a lot to clean up. So I prefer just to brown them right in the soup pot, and it works perfectly. Now all I'm going to do is just put a little bit of cracked pepper on the top, but as I said, no salt, just a little bit of cracked pepper, and that's that. And this, I know a lot of you have asked me where I got this pepper mill. I think it's so cute because it looks like a lighthouse. I've actually had it a really long time and I wasn't able to find it anywhere, but I think there are similar things if you kind of go around and search online. I bought it years ago from the Celtic Sea Salt Company, but I don't think they carry it anymore, so I'm so sorry about that. But a lot of things I have is old. I know a lot of you have asked me about my teapot too. That's not made either. But you see, I buy things and I keep them forever. In any event, alrighty. Well, now what we're going to do, we're going to pick this up and we're just going to put this into a medium hot soup pot, and we're going to get ready to brown it. Okay, here we go. Oh, listen to that sizzle. Now, I do not put, since we've got some fat, this is, as you can see, these shanks are fairly well marbled. I do not add any extra fat when I go to brown these. And the reason is I'm going to use this broth today to make soup. I'm not going to be chilling it and removing any fat. I'm going to use it today to make broth. Or to make broth that I then make soup with. So I don't want to have a lot of fat on the top because that can be a little unappetizing for some when you go to serve it as a soup. So I'm just going to sort of dry brown these and it'll be fine. So I'm just going to let these brown up for about 4 or 5 minutes on one side, and then I'm going to flip them over and brown them a little more. I'll just show you this. Oh, I better get some pot holders, that's hot. And then I'm going to flip them over and brown them for another 4 to 5 minutes on the other side. So I browned these on one side, and I'll put in a picture too so you can see it up close. And now I'm just flip them over and brown them on the other side. And this is the color that you're looking for, just a nice sear. So I just wanted to show you how nicely browned these are and how they've got what's called the fond. That's sort of all the little brown bits that accumulate in the bottom of the pan when you're browning these shanks, or any meat for that matter. And what we're going to do is, when we deglaze this with the water that we'll add, that's going to add to the glorious brown color and wonderful flavor that broth is known for. So I'm just going to take these out of the pot now, and they released a little bit of fat, and so that's what I'm going to saute these vegetables up in. And I just wanted to say, if you like these kind of videos where I make broth, and if you'd like to see me make stock, and you like the bone broth videos that I make, give me a thumbs up and let me know in the comments below if you'd like me to show you how to make stock, which is in essence kind of the opposite of broth. So now I'm going to go in and add our mirepoix, our carrots, and our onions. And I just put these in all together. You can certainly saute the onions first if you want, and then add in the carrot and celery. But I like to take little shortcuts where I can get them. And I don't see a significant difference in the end product. So I'm just going to put these in all together. And then let me just get every little bit off this plate. And then I'm going to go add in the peppercorns and the bay leaf. So now I'll add in the bay leaf and the peppercorns, and we'll get ready to mix everything around. There we go. And we'll get everything incorporated, and we'll just take a few minutes just to give these some color. Well, my seasoning base has just been sauteed up here for a few minutes. It's got some wonderful color on it. So now we'll go ahead and we'll add the meat back in, and then we're going to cover with water. And now what we're going to do, as I said, is just cover with water. And you just want to go about 1 inch or 2 above the meat, and that'll be perfect. Now I'm going to bring this up to a boil and then immediately turn it down to simmer, and I'm going to low so that it can simmer, and I'm going to let it simmer for about 45 minutes. Now with broth, you can let it simmer for 45 minutes up to 2 hours, but I think you're going to be very surprised how after 45 minutes you're going to see that you actually have a lovely broth. So if you're in a rush, don't feel that you have to go the full 2 hours. You might find you're very happy with the product that you have at 45 minutes. And while we're waiting for this to come up to a boil, I have to tell you something very cute. I had a viewer tell me and leave me a comment that I am like a Mr. Rogers version of Ina Garten, and that was one of the best compliments I've ever heard. So I have to tell you that today is a lovely day in the neighborhood because it's raining here in Central Texas. And whenever it rains in Central Texas, because we can really be in some big droughts every once in a while, that whenever it does rain, it's a good day and a lovely, happy day, and a perfect day to make some broth to then turn into a nice soup. Well, I've got this up to a boil, so I'm going to put the lid on, and then I'm going to turn it down to low. And I'm going to let that simmer for about 45 minutes, and we'll check on it at that point and see how it's doing. Now, there's a couple of things, well, actually, one thing I want to mention. I did not deglaze the pan after I removed the shanks and after, once I sauteed the vegetables. I didn't deglaze it with any type of liquor, such as a wine or a fortified wine like a Marsala or Madeira, so on and so forth, or white vermouth, which I use a lot when I make bone broth. And the reason is because this simmers a relatively short period of time, I am worried that the alcohol that I use to deglaze the pan may not fully evaporate and may leave a little taste in the broth that may be unpleasant to some. It may have a little bit of a strong, taste of either the wine or the fortified wine. So I don't deglaze the pan like that. I just pour the water in and go from there. Now, I know you might be saying, but Mary, the shanks have those little bones in it, and if you added some form of acid, even if it were, just a little apple cider vinegar, which I don't like to use because I do feel that has a little off-putting taste, but if you put a little acid, that would extract nutrients from the bones, and that is true. However, the bone in the shank is so small that the amount of nutrients that we're going to extract, or the little bit of collagen that it has, is, in my humble opinion, I always like to preface like that, is a little insignificant. And I'm more concerned about the end product and how the flavor is than extracting a minor amount of nutrients that might come from those little bones. With broth, our primary focus is on making a high protein liquid because we're extracting the protein from all the meat that goes into it. So that's just to give a little explanation as to why I don't deglaze the pan with any type of acid, because my concern is not to extract anything from the bones, but more the focus on the protein we're extracting from the meat and the final flavor of the broth. Well, I've had this simmering for about 45 minutes, so now we'll remove the lid. Oh, look at that. Oh, it looks beautiful. I'll show you. Let me just get this. Look at that luscious broth. Isn't that beautiful? All righty. Well, now we're going to take out the shanks and we'll talk about what we're going to do with them. Now, I just wanted to show you, so I took the shanks out, and you'll see this is one of the little bones that was in the shank, and the marrow has slipped right out and it's been incorporated with the broth. So that adds a nice little bit of extra nutrition. Now you have a couple of options as to what you can do with this meat. First, you can shred it and get all the edible meat off and just remove the little sinewy pieces or the little bits of cartilage. Now don't throw those out, save those. But the nice edible meat you can then use to put in your broth that we're making and make a nice soup. And pieces like this, which really wouldn't be, appropriate. This is some of the membrane that was around the shanks that I cut to try to help them lay as flat as possible. I don't throw this out. I save these bits and I put them in a bag, and I put them either in the fridge if I'm going to be making another broth or a bone broth even, and if I'm going to be making it within 2 days, because I don't like to keep anything like this in the fridge more than 2 days. I think it starts to get a little off flavor or off odor at that point, and I don't want that to go into my broth or my bone broth. But I'll save all these little pieces in a bag, usually put them in my freezer, and then when I get ready to make another broth or make a bone broth, probably most likely, I throw in all these little bits and pieces. I feel there's still, you know, it's only been simmered for 45 minutes, so I feel there's still some nutrition we can get out of these things. And another option is if you don't feel that you will be using the meat up right away and you don't want to put it in your fridge and you'd rather freeze it, what I recommend is, again, shred off all the meat that's nice and edible and package it up appropriately, you know, in some sort of freezer type container or freezer bags, whatever you use. And then you can also save your broth also in the freezer if you want to do that, if you're not going to be using that right away. And then you'll have your broth and you'll have your shredded meat, and then you have a nice, you can, you know, have your ingredients for making a nice soup whenever you're ready. So since I'm going to use the broth to make soup, I'm going to go ahead and shred this and get all the nice edible meat off it, put the little sinewy bits and cartilage, whatever the case may be, in a bag, and I'm going to put that in my freezer, and then I'll show you how we're going to strain the broth. Now all I'm going to do is just scoop out my little bit of this mirepoix mixture that I used in the very beginning to make the broth. And I just want to mention about this. The reason that I peel the carrots and dice them and peel the onion and dice it and dice up the celery different than when I'm making a stock or a bone broth is because this is simmered for such a short period of time. I want to get the maximum nutrition out of those vegetables, and I feel I can do that by cutting them up small and not making the broth work so hard to try to extract nutrients out of larger pieces. Now don't worry, I'm not going to waste this. I'm going to actually use this in my soup, and the only thing I need to do is remove the bay leaf and also fish out a few of those peppercorns that I put in. Now certainly I could have put all of that in like a little cheesecloth, but I don't use that because cheesecloth, you know, only lasts for so many times being used, and then it really kind of starts to disintegrate and needs to be discarded. So what I need to do is find those little bags, those little reusable cotton bags to put all of my spices in or whatnot, so then I can just fish it out and make the job a little easier. But I don't have any right now. But if I do, and if I find some in my travels, I'll share them with you. So I'm just going to fish these out with a little spoon and take this bay leaf out. And I'm going to put those aside until I'm ready to make soup, which I'm also going to add my shredded beef, from the beef shanks. Now I've got a little bit of fat floating on top of the broth, and I know some of you have said you don't mind that, but my husband and I like a little bit of a clearer broth that doesn't have any fat in it, so I'm going to use my handy dandy fat separator that I know a lot of you have asked me about, and I'll be sure to put a link in the description below as to where you can get one. I'm going to use this to defat the broth because I'm going to make soup with it right now. Now, if I wasn't going to be making the soup right now, I could easily put this in my refrigerator and just let the fat congeal on top and then remove it with a spoon. So that's certainly an option as well. And for those of you who have asked, I want to assure you, I do not throw the fat away. I always save the beef fat, and it's called tallow, and I use it to cook with. I love it. It's wonderful for frying and sautéing. And I do the same if I'm making chicken broth as well. I save the fat, otherwise known as schmaltz, which is wonderful, again, in recipes, especially chopped chicken livers. You can't go wrong. You gotta have the schmaltz if you're gonna make chopped chicken livers. So all I'm gonna do is ladle this broth into my fat separator, and if you've not seen me use this before, I've used it in various videos where I've made beef bone broth, chicken bone broth, my perpetual bone broths, various bone broth recipes, but it works great for broth and stock as well. And what you do is, so you just keep pouring it in like this, and I'll show you. The fat will rise to the top. There's not a lot in making broth, but there's a little tiny bit of fat at the top there. And so this allows you to really, in essence, sort of clarify your broth of the fat if you do want to use it where you're making a soup and you don't want any little, fat sort of circulating around on the top. But once you just let it rise to the top, and I'll take a picture of this so that you can see it up a little closer. But then all you're going to do is take another vessel in which you want to put your broth, and this thing just has a little thumb handle type thing, lever, that's the word I was looking for. And you just go like this. How clever is that? And then when you get down to the bottom, as it gets lower and lower, you'll see the fat, and then you can just stop. And then what I'll do is I'll decant this fat into another container that I'll save to use for cooking. Now, there are little bits in here that a strainer like this is not going to catch. I'm not worried about it because I'm using this broth to make a soup, and I'm going to be adding in shredded beef. So the fact that there are kind of little bits in here, that's fine. But if you want a completely clarified broth, then what you'll want to do is use a strainer lined with, and I like to use flour sack towels. And if you watch my beef bone broth video, you'll see the exact process. But I'll show you quickly what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is using a strainer like this, and you'll just put it over whatever vessel you're putting your broth into, and then you would just line this with a little bit of, as I said, a flour sack towel, or if you use cheesecloth, you can certainly line it with that, and even a coffee filter might work. And then you would just do the same process. Just strain it through your fat separator, down through your lined strainer, and into the vessel to catch your broth. But I'm not going to take that extra step because, as I said, I'm just going to use this broth to make a beef soup with, actually, a beef barley soup. So having those little bits of meat floating around in the broth is perfect. So we're ready to continue straining again. And we'll just go until we see that fat getting down to the bottom, and we'll keep that from going into our broth. 4 flavorful cups of beautiful broth. If you'd like to learn more about broth, be sure to subscribe to my channel and then click on this video over here where I tell you the difference between broth, stock, and bone broth. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.